Thank you. I'm very proud to present to you the next speaker. She's called Lena Wijk. She used to do her practice as a psychologist in our unit. And she was asked to hold an introduction to the concept of independence and dependence. So I will hand over to you, Lena, for the next hour. And after her speech, there will be a coffee break.
Thank you, Henrik. As Henrik said, I'm going to talk to you about the concepts of independence and dependence from a psychological perspective, and I will also talk in general terms, like as for all us being human beings. And I would like to take you along for a journey through life and show you how all of us balance on a thin line between dependence and independence. You want me to speak louder? Or is it possible to raise the mic in some way? What if? Okay. Is it better now? No? Better now? Okay, good. I would like to take you along for a journey through life. I lost. I would like to show you how dependence is actually necessary in our struggle to become independent individuals. And I would like to shed light on some of the theories that I believe helps us to understand this in different stages in life. The concept dependence and independence doesn't constitute a separate part of psychology. It's rather in all theories that deals with our relationship to ourselves and to others. The most important thing for me today is to try to show you that dependence is not exclusive for people with an impairment or any others, but it's something that we all have in common. I also want to show you that the ability to be dependent is actually a beautiful thing, and that it's just as important for having a good life as being able to be independent. And to begin with, I would like to share with you some of the process that brought me to stand here before you today. Because I think it's a good example of just how dependent I am on the people around me. I've been incredibly dependent on what I can call my secure base to be able to pull this act of independence. I'm way out of my comfort zone right now. The main thought that has been going through my head has been, oh my God, I can't do this. What do I have to say? I can't do this. But after endless hours of discussing with my partner, with my colleagues, with my friends, I managed to change that thought, or at least give an answer to it. It's far from sophisticated, it's just shut up, you can do it. But that is a lot more helpful than when I thought that my resources couldn't be enough to meet the demands, which is in fact the definition of a crisis. The most important thing for me has been to have my secure base. I can always come back to them no matter what happens, and they will take care of me, they will comfort me. Either if you boo me off stage, which I hope you will not do, or if you give me just sad smileys afterwards, they will take care of me, they will accept me. And it's thanks to them that I've been able to pull this act of independence off today. But enough about my feelings now. I wanted to share this with you because I believe that just like me, all of you will be able to find examples relating to your own lives on the constant tension between dependence and independence. But let's begin our theoretical excursion outside the individual person and with the Russian psychologist Yuri Bronfenbrenner. He developed the ecological system theory, and he showed how children are not only influenced by their families, but also by social norms and political decisions. His model consists of rings, like the layers of an onion, where the core symbolizes the individual. Next, we have the microsystem, and we have the mesosystem. The microsystem consists of family, friends, neighbors, schools, religious beliefs. The mesosystem is not a system on its own, but it's rather the interaction between the different microsystems. The school interacts with the family influences the neighbors and are influenced by the neighbors. And already at this stage, it becomes evident that our own unique relationship with independence and dependence is set in a quite complex context. The mesosystem can also act as a protection, you can call it protection, against influences from other rings in the model. The microsystem, for example, it consists of overall values in society, such as the way that we, at least in Sweden, embrace independence and individuality. These differ, of course, between different places in the world and even within the same countries. But a microsystem that constitutes of good relationships, and where it is considered important to have courage to help others, but also to accept help from others, can be good for someone who has an impairment or get unemployed or for some other reason needs help from society and from close ones. Living in a society where accepting help is not sneered at can protect the individual from feelings of shame. However, this is a brief attempt to summarize a rather comprehensive model, but Bronfenbrenner model illustrates just what a complex context we are part of when we try to balance. But let's turn from the bigger context to the individual person. As humans, we are quite unique in that way, that we are rather helpless on our own when we are born. From the minute that we are born, we are completely dependent on other humans. We have different ways of making others like us and want to take care of us. We have the smile, of course we have the screams, but we are completely dependent on having our signals answered, actually in order to survive. There's an English psychoanalyst named Donald Winnicott, and he took it even further. He claims that a small child doesn't exist on its own. According to Winnicott, the infant is not aware of its needs and is only able to understand if it is hungry or angry, or how the mother reacts, and take care of the child's expressions. The child is dependent on having someone else to relate to in order to exist in a psychological sense. That is dependence to me. The mother, or the one who has the mother function, must also help the child leave this complete dependence so that it can start exploring the world, but without being caused too much pain in the process. It is necessary to bring the child forward into the world without overwhelming it. According to Winnicott's point of view, the small child is so dependent on the parent in the beginning that it doesn't even exist in its own sense. And the child depends on the mother or the father to manage the transition into increased independence. Today we do know that infants are much more competent than was thought of in Winnicott's days, but still he managed to capture in a pretty powerful way how dependent we are on close relationships, and how that helps us to deal with and recognize our emotions, and that goes both for childhood and as adults. There's a number of interesting studies showing how dependent we are on affection and relationships for optimal development. The child psychologist Renée Spitz compared small children living in orphanage and in a prison. The The children who lived in the prison were taken care of by their mothers, whereas the children living in the orphanages were taken care of professional nurses. His results show that after 3 years, 2/3 of the children in the orphanages had died. And after 5 years, all of the children in the prison, they were still alive. That is pretty horrible. But why did these children die? Spitz and his colleagues came to the conclusion that it was having the mother as a constant caregiver that made the difference. Spitz diagnosed these children with anaclitic depression, which in its most extreme form made these children starve to death. They become increasingly passive. They stopped seeking social contact altogether. They lost weight, and they were also more prone to physical illness than were expected. However, if they were reunited with their mothers within 6 months, this state could be reversed. His Spitz's study contributed to a wider understanding of small children's dependence on lasting, close relationships in order to develop. There are also more recent studies from the United States that has shown that children growing up in orphanages where they haven't gotten the affection and the close relationships that small children need, they even develop smaller brains. However, once again, if these children were set in contact with the needs that they need, like close relationships and affection, this developmental pattern also could be reversed. These are pretty strong indicators that we do need other people and that we depend on other people to develop into well-functioning, independent human beings. Another psychologist actually specifically mentioned the tension between dependence and independence in his theory. According to a man called Erik Erikson and his psychosocial model, everyone must solve a number of tasks in order to reach complete development. Each task consists of two opposites. For example, intimacy versus isolation between the age of 18 and 30. The next task can only be addressed if the previous one has been solved in a good enough way. But according to this theory, everyone must go through 8 stages or development, but the solutions can vary depending on the society that the person lives in. A positive outcome is when the individual can develop his or her personality, but also put it in a cultural and social context. This means, if we go back to Bronfenbrenner, that the interaction between the layers must work together. Erikson, too, emphasizes the child's dependence on its parents during the first 2 years. In order to solve the task at hand, which at this stage is the conflict between trust and mistrust, the child needs a parent who conveys a feeling of reliability and predictability. The child uses this feeling of security to start trusting itself and its body, to start developing an identity, and to build up a basic awareness that others can be trusted. Between the age 1 and 3, the main task consists of just becoming more independent. If this developmental task is not resolved in a good enough way, shame and doubt will instead be what dominates the child's experience. Thanks to the development of its motor skills, the child is now able to do things on its own. and the fundamental trust that the child hopefully harbors will help it to become more independent. The acquisition of language also provides an opportunity to challenge the parents, which is part of an increased autonomy. I recently came across a fantastic quotation, or at least I think so. There was a child who had just turned 4 who said to his parents, "Why do you have to decide too? I am already deciding." He didn't think there was any purpose for the parents to decide too, and he was claiming his independence by the use of language. The third developmental task is the ability to take initiative. This is followed by yet 5 other developmental tasks that I will not go through today. But these need to be solved during the person's life or during all of us' lives. The child depends on its parents or other important adults and their ability to adjust their behavior to the developmental task that the child is working on at the moment. So in order to move along and solve the developmental task that leads to increased autonomy, the child is highly dependent on others. And then there's the attachment theory, which probably many of you have heard of. And the attachment theory emphasizes our need for close relationships early on in life. But it also focuses on how these relationships will help us later on in life to create and maintain close relationships, both to ourselves and to others. The theory implies that we carry the sum of our experiences from previous relationships within ourselves as internal working models. John Bowlby is considered to be the father of the attachment theory, and he was originally a physician, a psychoanalyst, and a family therapist, and he worked in England during the middle of the 20th century, not the 19th century. He was trained in the psychodynamic field, and that meant that he came from a tradition that focused on the child's inner world. And so he also does, he emphasizes the child's inner world and its processes. The attachment then can be described as the child's relationship to one or more people who have emotional relevance for the child, and to whom the child goes for safety and protection. This is a special relationship for the child, and the loss of an attachment figure will cause a lot of anxiety for the child. During the childhood years, the child normally develops attachment to one or more people, and the interaction within these relationships will develop into internal working models about the self and about others. According to Bowlby, all children have a fundamental need for affection and protection, and children are born with a biological predisposition to attain that. Infants are not able to survive on their own, as I previously said. But unfortunately, the attachment can be either safe or unsafe, depending on the attachment figure's ability to appear safe and present and predictable in his or her attempts to meet the child's needs. A bit more about the internal working models. They can be described as a model for the normal interaction with an attachment figure, and it helps the child to understand the attachment figure's emotions and behavior, but it also regulates the child's attachment behavior. Suppose that the parent has the habit of ignoring the child when the child is frightened and seeks the parent. This will probably result in the child creating a model of the parent as being someone who cannot be trusted, and who is not worth going to for comfort. The child's model of the self will also be shaped in this relationship, and perhaps will it lead to the child being seen or having the idea of itself as not being significant. In a safe attachment relationship, the child feels safe in knowing that the parent is reliable and will help in a dangerous situation, and the child can therefore use its energy instead to explore the environment. I referred to the concept of secure base in the beginning as my important people being my secure base. That is not something that I have developed on my own. It is a concept that is related to the attachment theory. And it is also, or at least I think it is, what Winnicott refers to when he says that the mother, or the one who has the mother function, helps the child to go into the world and become more independent. The concept was first used by Mary Ainsworth, who between the 50s and the 60s, and the 50s and the 70s, did a lot of research on small children all over the world. She described the secure base as the balance between exploring and attachment, or between independence and security. The parent's sensitivity towards the child's signals, in combination with the mother's availability and her acceptance of the role as caregiver, helps the child to organize its behavior around the mother. And the mother becomes the secure base that the child can leave to explore the surroundings and return to for protection, support, and encouragement. Exactly in the same way that I can do to my people after this. So the attachment figure functions as a secure base or as a fort for the child's exploration. The child can be seen as an explorer leaving the fort, assured that the fort will provide protection if required by the expedition. Under good circumstances, the development of internal working models creates such a secure base. Now let's turn more to how our dependence and independence, how we balance that as adults. There's a cognitive concept that has been proven to be valuable in relation to the secure base and internal working models, and that's called schema. And schema therapy is also a therapy form that is used to help people who are stuck in problematic behavior patterns and who tend to have difficulties balancing between dependence and independence. Cognitive schemas are comprehensive structures, and they guide us in our interpretations in our daily life. If we, for example, go to a restaurant, we have schemas that help us know about what's going to happen. We expect to go into a restaurant, to be given a menu, to order, to have the food, to pay, and then to leave. This is not only applicable on restaurant visits, but we also use our schemas to guide our expectations and behavior from relationships. And these schemas are based on previous experiences and can be seen as connected to how the internal working models are formed from our previous relationships. We create general assumptions about ourselves, about the world, and about others. For example, if during childhood and adolescence I may have found myself in situations that taught me that others cannot be trusted, this becomes a powerful assumption to me, or an internal working model, that I carry with me. And in order to protect myself from the negative consequences of these basic assumptions, I create rules for how to live my life. If I constantly assume that others cannot be trusted and that others are out to hurt me, I would probably create a rule to keep me from becoming dependent on others. Since if others cannot be trusted, dependence is not such a good thing to be, not such a clever thing to be. And my rule made something like, if I make sure that I can manage on my own, and if I do not have to trust others, others will not be able to hurt me. This rule will then guide my thoughts, my emotions, my behavior, and my interpretation of situations and relationships. If, or more likely when, I find myself in a situation where I need help from others, this will become very problematic for me. I may also have difficulties finding a partner and staying in a relationship, because situations where I have to let go of my independence will cause great anxiety to me. And anxiety is the same as fear. My basic assumptions are telling me that I must manage on my own. And the thought of being dependent becomes really scary. And at the same time, we all depend on others in different ways to feel good in life. Complicated this. I believe that if all of you just think for a few moments, you will find examples from your own lives when your assumptions about yourself, about others, or the world in general have caused you problems. This can be in your private life, in your role as a professional, or when you need help from professionals. I'm giving you a few moments to think about that. However, if we can understand our patterns and how these patterns influences us in our relationships, we can become more independent from our history and start behaving in new ways. And simply put, that is psychotherapy. And we do also attach as adults. In an article in the Swedish Psychological Association and their magazine, there's a psychologist called Inga Tidefors, and she writes about the close relationships that we create as adults and the similarities with the relationship between the small child and the attachment figures. The non-verbal interaction, such as holding, touching, having eye contact, kissing, smiling, are examples of behavior that are at least hopefully involved in a love relationship, as well as in the interaction between the child and the attachment figure. Freud, of course I have to mention Freud, he describes the erotic kiss as imaginary suckling, like what a baby does to her mother's breast. And in this imaginary suckling, the boundary between the giver and the taker is erased, and giving is just as important as receiving, and receiving is just as important as giving. Attempts for independence for one or the other parties during a kiss would probably seem quite odd, or at least I have problems seeing that scenario. Our souls become intertwined in the same way that our bodies are when we hold hands. The fact that the loss of a partner often causes a personal crisis is yet another sign of just how closely connected we are to other people. When the relationship disappears, we lose a part of ourselves too. The same article also highlights the infant's intensive exploration of others with its gaze. And the article points out this behavior comes back when we fall in love. The infant's courage and stamina regarding eye contact and all sorts of exploration of the other is emphasized, and rightly so, because it takes courage to approach another person and possibly become dependent of him or her. And it's not the same thing being subjected to this exposure and vulnerability as an adult without the usually facilitating factors. As children, our frontal lobes are not yet fully developed, and that makes our ability to think of the consequences to be quite poor. That is one of the reasons why children are able to throw themselves from chairs and slopes, expecting to be caught every time. Teenagers, and by all means adults as well, use different ways to intoxicate themselves. For example, with alcohol or adrenaline, to silence the part of the brain that worries about consequences. Being in love in itself has also been proven to be intoxicant, releasing elements comparable to chemical amphetamine. We need courage to ask others for help as adults, and we should avoid all intoxicants, I think. For example, in our contact with the healthcare system, or we risk being treated for something else than we came for. The attachment theory also helps us understand differences in the attachment patterns in love relationships. If we have secure internal working models, we can find the balance between independence and dependence within the love relationship. If we instead have experiences of insecure attachment, we will have trouble maintaining that balance, and either become way too dependent or have difficulties coping with the affection and instead strive to be independent at any cost. Actually, it is quite a miracle that love relationships can function at all, considering everything that is in motion and all the luggage that must suddenly be unpacked, and so many fears that must be confronted. But the power of love is pretty strong, because we all need the tenderness and the confirmation to feel good. In love relationships, as well as in the attachment between the child and the adult, elements in the body are set free, elements that are necessary for us to make us feel good. And this is not only the chemical amphetamine, there are other elements as well. And this is another confirmation showing just how important other people are to us. And another fact is that isolation in itself often constitutes the greatest factor for maintaining a depression. Most of us do not feel good when we are alone. Together we feel secure, and we can manage things that we are able to deal with on our own. There's a Swedish journalist called Teppas Fogelberg, and he writes about what it is like to live with this disease, retinitis pigmentosa, which I hope I pronounced correctly. Eric is nodding. He always had difficulties to see in the dark during his whole life. And as a grown-up, he meets a woman, and this is a woman. He wants to be with her wherever she goes. And he faces something that is normally very hard for him. She wants to visit a nightclub. He writes, "Let's go to a nightclub," she says. I hesitate because I try to avoid dark clubs. And the story continues, and in the end, he decides to go with her. And the reason is, he writes, because together with her I feel so free. Together in the safety of the relationship with the other, he becomes free. We depend on each other to become independent. It is not my mission today to talk about the relationship between the one who needs to ask for some kind of help and the professional, but I would still like to talk a bit about it. I would like to emphasize the courage that it requires to ask for help. Because when I seek the help from a professional, I approach a person that does not depend on me in the same way as I depend on him or her. And with me, I carry all my luggage, my basic assumptions. And I lack the child's naivety or the intoxication of the love relationship. Already in 1974, a very bright man or wise man called Bion said that in every consulting room there ought to be two quite scared persons, the patient and the psychoanalyst. And I am inclined to agree that it is necessary for the one who plays the role as the professional to also invest in the relationship in order to even out the balance between dependence and independence. It is not just love relationships, but also friendship, relationships with colleagues, etc., etc., that makes it possible for us to find what Winnicott called the play space. And by this he means the space between us and another person. And that this space, this relationship, makes it possible for us to explore ourselves again and again and gain an understanding about ourselves through the answers and the reactions that we get from others. Our inner structures and our self-image constantly need to be developed and explored, since the conditions change. We marry, we choose other ways of living together, or we choose to live alone. We have children, or we find out that we cannot have children. We become ill, or the illness that we already have changes. Someone close to us falls ill, or we lose someone that we hold dear. The conditions in our lives are constantly changing, and we face different challenges that affects us. We may discover sights that we did not know we had, or the change may provoke a crisis and makes us realize that for the moment we don't have the resources that we need to meet the demands and provoke a crisis. Sometimes the crisis also makes it clear to us that others depend on us. We are no longer able to help others the way we used to. The future we had planned together no longer exists. This can cause feelings of guilt and shame, and these feelings and emotions needs to be processed, and they need feedback from others. We will always need relationships with others, and in the space created between us and the other, we need to be given the chance to restore and reinvent ourselves and our relationships in new shapes, and thereby putting us once again in contact with our independence. There's a Swedish poet named Thomas Tranströmer who was actually recently rewarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. And I think that he is describing our inner life and the constant processes that goes on in our inner life in his poem Romanesque Arcs. Inside a huge Romanesque church, the tourists jostle in the half-darkness. The vault gaped behind the vault. No complete view. A few candlelights flickered. An angel with no face embraced me and whispered through my whole body. Don't be ashamed of being human. Be proud. You will never be complete, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Inside you, vault opens behind vault, endlessly. Blinded with tears, I was pushed out in the sun-setting piazza, together with Mr. and Mrs. Jones, Mr. Tanaka, and Signora Sabatani. And inside them all, vault, open, behind vault, endlessly. Actually, that is all I have. I was probably a bit nervous because I speed it up. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like to wish you a fantastic conference, which I am sure we're going to have, depending on all these people in the green sweaters. I would like to wish you a nice day in Lund, and good luck with your balancing. And I also hope that you all will find vault opening behind vaults endlessly, both in yourselves and in people you meet. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this opening plenary. That was so good, and there was such a good explanation, and a thorough and still a very clear going through different kinds of psychology theories in a very vivid way. Thank you very much. Now it's time for coffee break. We are a bit early, but we will make sure that we will be back again. And it's